Good afternoon, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Much better.
Okay, great. Dr. Potter and I are here in the same room, so there may be a bit of an echo. But I want to welcome everyone to this event. I want to start off by thanking the DC Prevention Center team, Dr. Green and Roz, and all of their staff for their hard work in planning this event over the summer months. And here we are talking about this important topic that is impacting all of our DC residents. And this is good information that we all should know about and should also understand how to address it the most effective and efficient way that we can. So I just want to say thank you to the team that prepared this event and worked hard to put it together. And I want to thank all of the attendees for participating as well. I hope you join us every day this week. The group has put together a wonderful week-long list of events that I think will be very impactful personally, and also for you to share the information and the knowledge that you gain from this experience. And with that said, I'm going to now introduce Dr. Lawrence Potter. He is the Chief Academic Officer for the University of the District of Columbia. And I'm going to turn it over to him now so he can say a few words. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry that you are not able to see my face, but I'm working at one of our satellite campuses here at the Bertie Backus campus. And it is indeed a pleasure for me to be able to share just a word of welcome with each of you this afternoon. First and foremost, let me say to everyone on this call, this is a very important example of the power of partnerships and the power of possibilities. And I want to thank Dean Smith for inviting me to be a part of today's program, but more importantly, Dr. Green for the collaboration and the cooperation in really kind of teeing this up as a community partner. And here at the University of the District of Columbia, the only public institution in and for the nation's capital, we feel very privileged, quite frankly, to be able to partner with community agencies in spreading awareness about the opioid crises. We have a range of students from across spectrums of lifestyles and backgrounds that invariably who may know individuals who may have been impacted by opioids. And so the more we can do to create awareness, the more we can do to uplift community, the more we can do to continue the collaboration and believe in the power of partnership and possibility. This is just one example of that. And so to each of you on the call, to all of the hands that have gone forward in preparing this week's activities, I would strongly encourage you to get the word out to your peers, to members in your network, in your communities, because quite frankly, and very oftentimes, we run away from these kinds of public discussions. And I think that this is an opportunity for us to lift as we climb and for us to uplift each other with facts, with information, and pointing to resources in the district's community that really lead to better outcomes. And so to Dean Smith, let me say thank you for the opportunity. And again, I hope that today's awareness program is one that people will benefit from, and that if this is being recorded, that the recording is shared very broadly across the district. So thanks for the opportunity to bring some greetings.
Thank you, Dean Smith and Dr. Potter. We really appreciate the kind words. You are correct. It is wonderful working in collaboration. This is being recorded, and we will do all of our efforts to share broadly throughout our communities. I'm excited about today's discussion. If you don't have the program, we will have the program up on UDC's website where you can download the speaker bios And we definitely have a jam-packed today, as we do for the rest of the week. But today is Make It Count Monday, DC Silent Killer, the Opioid Crisis. And we're very excited about having Dr. Chicarlo Leak, Director of Policy and Operations for DC Office of Racial Equity, whom you saw in one of the previous videos. Dr. Alka Gupta, Chief Medical Officer and co-founder of Blue Rock Primary Care, Professor Salima Snow, UDC School of Law, and of course my staff. And let me just introduce to everyone my staff and the staff of the Wards7&8DC Prevention Center. We have online Geraldine Bowden, who's the Assistant Project Coordinator, as well as a recent graduate of UDC, and our illustrious director, Roz Parker, and she is in a different situation, but she is online. So I want to thank, and I'm also an alumni of the University of District of Columbia, and I'm excited to be able to work with my local university to be able to do this. So let's get started. Let's jump right into it. If there are any questions, I would just say, please keep your mic muted. We'll use our Zoom etiquette. So if you want to react, you have a question after each presentation, you will have a chance to present and ask questions. We'll take at least three questions per presenter. But please listen to what each of these individuals have to say on this topic. They're extremely knowledgeable, and this information needs to go wide and far. So thank you so much. And we'll get started with Dr. Chicarlo Leak. Thank you so much.
Can you all see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. First, I want to start out by expressing my gratitude and saying thank you to UDC as well as the DC Prevention Center for allowing me to present today. As Dr. Green Lane said, I am Chicarlo Leak, the Policy and Operations Director for the DC Office of Racial Equity. This is the executive branch of the Office of Racial Equity. There is also kind of a similar office that is situated within the council, which is called CORE, the Council Office of Racial Equity. So I just want to make that distinction between the two different offices there. And much of the work that I'll talk to you today about is focusing on work that I did while at the Chief Medical Examiner's Office as a supervisory epidemiologist. So although I am the Policy and Operations Director and focus on racial equity, this is work that was done in my previous role. And I bring to it kind of pretty much most of my career has really been focused on policies, programs, creating policies, programs, and services that really address and reduce health disparities. And so this work is definitely a labor of love. And so I'll kind of get started there. As you probably all are aware, the opioid crisis is a major problem across the nation, and the District of Columbia is no different. And so as you can see from this line graph here, we saw a significant increase in opioid overdoses between 2019 and 2020. We saw a 46% increase. And so I leave that number there, but to say that the district, as I said, is not alone in that. Within the district or in the region, Maryland saw an 18% in their fatal opioid overdoses, as well as Virginia, which topped us statewide, they had 47%. So as a region, we are struggling to address the opioid crisis. And we all know that this is all happening within the confluence of the COVID-19 epidemic or pandemic. And so kind of putting two pandemics together, this was a perfect storm to see this major increase that we saw. And so you can see that the medical examiner investigated over 1,600 cases of fatal opioid overdoses since 2016. If you focus on that light blue line right there, it's really showing you the trend over 2020. And you can see for most of that blue line, it hovers over any other lines that you see on that line graph, really. So that really should just communicate that there is a huge problem that we saw in 2020 However, we were trending up before that, right? And so I'd be remiss if I did not mention in 2013, we had 213 overdoses. Even without the pandemic, in 2019, we saw an increase and saw 281. So even without the pandemic, we were already kind of in the throes of an epidemic that was really increasing on us. And we really were trying to grapple with reversing that. And so adding COVID-19 on top of that made it even that much more challenging. And lastly, just kind of point out where we are to date. As you can see, the purple, light purple line, we've had 197 opioid overdoses through the first 6 months of this year. And that's roughly similar to what we saw in 2020. In 2020, there were 214 during that same time period. But typically the medical examiner has some pending cases. And so that time, there could still be some cases from this first 6 months of the year that are not being displayed in that number. And so roughly the numbers are pretty similar to where we were last year for 2021. When we look at what really is driving this trend, right? So people want to know what is causing this increase. Well, overall, we all know that that increase has really been driven by the increase of fentanyl in the drug supply. And so if you focus on that dark blue line that shows you kind of this really increase we've seen since 2016. Since 2015, we had 20% of our cases that contain fentanyl, whereas in 2020, 94%. So it's a dramatic increase over that 5, 6, 7 year time period, right? And so the medical examiner's office continues to monitor those trends. And we know that it's largely driven by fentanyl, which until 2017, most of our opioid overdoses were heroin related, but that kind of switch happened in fentanyl. We also, the Office of the Medical Examiner's Office continues to monitor other drugs of abuse as well. And so one of the main things that they noticed in 2019 was a slight uptick or change in the cocaine supply and seeing this adulteration in other drugs. And so part of that work was monitoring the cocaine, the number of overdoses due to cocaine. And so they've noticed that although the number of deaths due to cocaine have maintained steady, there was a slight change in that those individuals who tend to die, there has been a slight increase of those individuals who are Black males and Black females dying from cocaine. And so as we start talking about prevention and intervention strategies, it's important to remember these kind of changes in drug trends, because that's going to change the strategies of our prevention and intervention partners and stakeholders. And so it's really important to have data to really drive the decision. And it's also important to remember in this work, right? As an epidemiologist, a lot of times I'll show data, right? And as the medical examiner's office is death data, right? And so, but one of the key things I like to remember and point out is that these are individuals and loved ones who, did not wake up that day. And so their families, their communities, their friends, are missing them. And so it's more than just a number. These are people in individual lives. And so we really do, as a district, have to work hard to reverse this trend. So looking at the demographic data right here, you can see overall, the majority of our overdoses are 75% are between the ages of 40 to 69, 73% are male, and roughly 84% are Black. So that trend remains pretty consistent within that range for all of those different demographic factors over the course of those years. And so we know that is a trend. However, if you notice looking at the age demographic chart in there, in 2016, we had very few individuals we had none that were less than 20 years of age, right? And then we had very few within that 20 to 29 year age range, right? But in stark contrast, looking at 2020, we actually had 3 individuals that were less than 20 years of age and 35 that were in that 20 to 29 year age. So within this time period, we've seen a steep increase in the number of individuals who are younger adults, right? And then in 2021, we've actually seen 4. So we went from 4 or seeing 3 in 2020 to now seeing 4. So there's a slight increase in change in the number of younger people who are being affected by the opioid crisis. And when we look at data, not shown here is demographic data on jurisdiction of residents. We know that by and large, the majority of residents that are seen at the medical examiner's office are residents of DC. And so average is roughly 70% of the individuals are DC residents. Although if you I had the data, and you can check the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner's website for their most recent report. And if you were to look at that report, you would see that there is a slight uptick in the number of individuals who were actually homeless. And so we went from seeing roughly 67% of the individuals being DC residents, and that number was 77% in 2018. That change and that difference, you're wondering where those individuals went. They were more likely to be individuals who are experiencing homelessness. And so we know that there's also a need to deliver prevention and intervention strategies that address the homeless individuals as well. And when you look at ward of residents, largely, by and large, these are individuals who are residents of wards 5, 7, 8, with 6 not being too far behind Ward 5 in terms of the number of opioid overdoses they see per year. And lastly, so the district as a whole has worked very hard to reverse this trend, although they have not been successful over the last couple of years. There's been a lot of COVID-19 presented a lot of challenges for every one to address the isolation and stress and other factors that were created by that, from job loss, homelessness, and everything. But as you look at some of the successes that the Live Long DC strategy to address the opioid crisis, there has been some accomplishments. And just so you know, that is the district's plan and blueprint to address the opioid epidemic. And so it is a collaboration of many district government agencies as well as community-based organizations to really do a district-wide approach to that. It's not likely that having government be the sole focus of the efforts, it will be effective in really reversing it. It really has to be a district-wide kind of approach to reversing this epidemic. And so I'm glad to see that this plan has had some accomplishments despite the trends that you've seen. So one of the main accomplishments that they've had is doubling down on the naloxone, right? And so they saw this 85% reversal since launching Live Long DC in the number of opioid overdoses that were successfully reversed, right? And so we know that really getting naloxone out there in communities and in individuals' hands can save lives, right? And so that is a really important measure that I think the district as a whole is working hard to do. Also awarding grants to faith-led organizations and institutions. As I said, part of this work is really getting the message out and letting people know about the crisis, letting them know about the drug supply, not to use alone, but also letting them know where to obtain life-saving measures. And so the more that you can bring in community-based organizations and faith-led or institutions, the greater the success or likelihood of success can be. And also operating or really supported 2 or 4 peer-operated centers that focus on serving individuals with opioid use disorders. There's also some promising and new strategies. The plan that was originally created in 2018 actually went through 2020. So in 2021, there was a new plan that was launched and released, and it includes several new strategies. One being, as a data person, I'm definitely interested in this, but using data really to drive outreach and prevention efforts, right? And so now using data that is captured through fire and emergency medical services, whenever someone experiences an overdose, that information is reported, and outreach workers are now deployed to those neighborhoods and those hotspots within a 24-hour period to deliver information on kind of this tainted drug supply, but also to allow people to receive naloxone and other information and support. So that's really a really promising and new strategy. DBH continued on launching educational campaigns. So they had the Text to Live campaign, as well as DC Health has launched an educational campaign as well. So really making sure that we're really getting the message out and informing residents is an important strategy. And also increase the capacity of the emergency department medicated assisted treatment induction program. And so by bringing in 2 additional hospitals, there's now 6 hospitals that are able to provide and link individuals who may experience an overdose into care and to support. And so that's a really important part. And when that's being a pair, there's also a new component of that where there's a pair-led individual that really tracks that individual and follows them after discharge to help support the linkaging to additional care and needs. And so there's a lot of promising and great work going on in the district. And so that is that. But as you know from the data, and as I've just said, it really takes a community-based approach to really address this issue. And I'm glad we have a lot of individuals who are on this call that already kind of focused on the work and really dialed in and doing their part. And hope that you as students and future leaders can take the mantle and create some additional programs and be creative in your approach to how we can reach residents and save lives. And that's it. So I'll take some questions if there are any.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Are there any questions for Dr. Lee? And I just want to, I did omit, but I do want to include my other colleague, Stephen Hazel, who's also part of the Wards7&8DC Prevention Center, who's online as well. Are there any questions for Dr. Lee? Okay, well, I do have one for you, Dr. Lee. What do you see are, you shared some impactful interventions that are happening right now, but what do you think are going to be very successful based off of the data that you've seen so far? And are we doing a better job? It looks like the numbers are very similar to last year. There's been more. I know the Prevention Center has been doing a lot more with our community partners around that. So do you see any hope in that?
Although the data is not showing this, and actually one of the things I wanted to say is that I was actually seeing the video that you showed, and that was from 2017. And yeah, and I was like, man, we have not been able to really reverse the trend. And so I was kind of saddened by seeing myself still talk about some of these same data points. However, I think that one of the things that may have happened during the pandemic, right, as we saw with hospitals and service providers, and with a steep increase that we went from 281 to 411 individuals, is really the capacity of our providers. And I know there are probably some speakers that will speak later to that issue of capacity, but with that steep level of increase, I think that could have impacted the way in which treatment was delivered and the ability to treat providers. I know some people have reported that as a thing, but I definitely know that, and I still feel inspired that we're doing the right thing, we're on the right track. I think this approach to getting naloxone out there, I saw you put the Text to Live, Live Long DC in the chat, and really having 35 pharmacies really dialed in, having it readily available, the educational campaigns or online courses that individuals can take. I definitely feel that the efforts are there, although we're not seeing the change right now. And so I'm definitely dialed in, but I definitely think that there may be more innovative strategies and ways to get information out there or to reach populations. And so that is one of the things that I think that hopefully there are some younger individuals who are on this call that can actually take the mantle and suggest some things that maybe we may not be thinking of. I tell people all the time, and I say that typically those individuals, whether in the drug market or in kind of any negative thing, they're a lot more creative and way more advanced than what we can sometimes within government or just approaches that we may think of. And so if there are some new and innovative ideas, we're welcome to hear that. I know you and Ross at the Prevention Center and everyone else on your team would love to hear that idea. So.
Absolutely. And
yeah,
thank you so much.
Dr. Lee, always good to see you. Stephen Hazel here. How are we doing in comparison to neighboring Maryland and Virginia? Did I hear that?
Put you on mute. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay.
Sorry, a year in this and we still mute yourself and can't get off.
Yeah.
So as I said in the beginning, as far as the trends in death data, we were below Virginia. Virginia had 47% increase in their fatal opioid overdoses.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, but we're much higher than Maryland. Maryland had 18%. The one caveat to that is to mention that, and it's always tricky, right, when we think about jurisdiction or residence, right, where the medical examiner in DC can see anyone that died within DC borders or close to them, and as long as you're transported to a DC hospital. So that theoretically could, as I said, from the data, there are individuals from Maryland that could have actually been Maryland residents that actually went to our DC hospitals.
Right.
So that would be, decreasing their numbers. And so
I got you. I got you. Okay, so that says that. Yeah, thank you so much.
And thank you, Dr. Leek. We're going to move on to our next presenter. Are there any other questions? I'd like to get our next presenter, Professor Snow from the UDC Law School, to do her presentation. And thank you so much for everyone.
Thank you so much. Everyone, you can hear me okay?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Great, thank you. So one, thank you to everyone who's put this together. Thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you to those who found my knowledge valuable to add to this conversation and for the invitation. And Dr. Leek, thank you so much for the data that you have shared and the insight that you provided. I want to discuss the racialization of recovery, because systemic racism affects virtually every aspect of our society. It begins with the Africans being brought to this country and categorized as mere property, as cargo. It continues with mass incarceration, racialized health disparities, which Dr. Leek shared some of that data, that's part of the work he's been doing. And it includes inadequate recovery programs in Black and Brown communities. So one of the reasons that I think this week-long program is so important is because the stigmas that we have associated with Black addiction has been very different than the stigmas that we associate with white addiction. And part of that comes because there have been various derogatory terms that have been used to describe African Americans, including terms that are supporting a frame that Black people are inferior, dangerous, savages, needed to be tamed. And we over-police Black communities because of that. We treat Black people's addiction as a crime instead of a health crisis that we consistently hear about. I want to rewind for a minute into the legacy of devaluing Black lives in the 70s with Nixon's war on drugs. Nixon's campaign led to enhanced penalties for certain targeted drug offenses such as crack cocaine, further supporting this frame to control dangerous Black people. Nixon, I want to read this quote from Nixon because I think it says it all in so many ways. He stated to a national audience, quote, "America's public enemy #1 in the United States is drug abuse. In order to fight and defeat this enemy, it is necessary to wage a new all-out offensive. It is essential for the American people to be alerted of this danger and to recognize that it is a danger," end of the quote. So Nixon's campaign to vilify Black people having an addiction further justified over policing Black communities for drug offenses, although during this time, white Americans used illicit drugs at a higher rate than Black people. Bill Clinton, saxophone and all, he expanded Nixon's war on drugs with enhanced sentencing for certain drug-related crimes, such as crack cocaine over powder cocaine. And I also think that it's important that we contextualize why this matters when we're talking about recovery. I think the first video you shared, the doctor talked about the different stigmas that we are associating with, well, I don't know if he used race, but the different stigmas associated with drugs matters when it comes to recovery. Give me a second, let me share my screen here, because I'm gonna actually share my time with Jay-Z, because I think Jay-Z does such an amazing job of contextualizing this whole war on drugs, as Nixon put it. And the contextualization of that Jay-Z does, it really brings home how we got to where we are, where Black communities have not been getting the treatment that has been so badly needed for so many years. Why has we've gotten to the point where Black communities, haven't been able to come forth because of stigma, and we haven't been getting the funding and the support, and our community hasn't been coming out to get that support when it is available. So this video is about, I think it's about 4 minutes. I normally wouldn't do this, but I think it's valuable to hear what Jay-Z does, and those who have seen it, perhaps looking at it through a different lens. Just making sure everyone can hear the video. Thumbs up. Yes? Can you hear the video?
I'm not hearing the video
No,
yet.
I can hear you, but I can't hear the video.
No.
Okay. Give me one
Make sure
second
you
here.
have it optimized so that you can see.
Yeah, I'm usually, let's see.
See it.
I used to be pride myself on Zoom, and I've been using WebEx so much now I have to refresh. So let's see. Optimize. Where's the optimization? I know where it is in WebEx. I'm not sure where the optimization.
When you're in the whiteboard, if you look at the bottom, it should be two boxes. One would say optimize for audio and optimize for video clip. Do you see that when you do the share screen?
Ah, there it is. Great. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to share sound is what I'm trying to do, correct? Or optimize for video clip. Optimize for video
Optimize
clip.
for video clip. That's correct.
Great. Thank you so much. How are we doing now?
Yep. Good. We can hear it.
Perfect. Thank you.
In 1986, when I was coming of age, Ronald Reagan doubled down on the war on drugs that had been started by Richard Nixon in 1971. Drugs were bad, fried your brain, and drug dealers were monsters. The sole reason neighborhoods and major cities were failing. No one wanted to talk about Reaganomics and the ending of social safety nets, the defunding of schools and the loss of jobs in cities across America. Young men like me who hustled became the sole villain, and drug addicts lacked moral fortitude. In the 1990s, incarceration rates in the US blew up. Today we imprison more people than any other country in the world. China, Russia, Iran, Cuba. All countries we consider autocratic and repressive. Yeah, more than them. Judges' hands were tied by tough on crime laws, and they were forced to hand out mandatory life sentences for simple possession and low-level drug sales. My home state of New York started this with Rockefeller laws. Then the feds made distinctions between people who sold powder cocaine and crack cocaine even though they were the same drug. Only difference is how you take it. And even though white people used and sold crack more than black people, somehow it was black people who went to prison. The media ignored actual data to this day. Crack is still talked about as a black problem. The NYPD raided our Brooklyn neighborhoods while Manhattan bankers openly used coke with impunity. The war on drugs exploded the U.S. prison population, disproportionately locking away black and Latinos. Our prison population grew more than 900%. When the war on drugs began in 1971, our prison population was 200,000. Today it is over 2 million. Long after the crack era ended, we continued our war on drugs. There were more than 1.5 million drug arrests in 2014. More than 80% were for possession only. Almost half were for marijuana. People are finally talking about treating addiction to harder drugs as a health crisis, but there's no compassionate language about drug dealers. Unless, of course, we're talking about places like Colorado, whose state economy got a huge boost by the above-ground marijuana industry. A few states south in Louisiana, they're still handing out mandatory sentences for people who sell weed. Despite a booming and celebrated 50 billion legal marijuana industry, most states still disproportionately hand out mandatory sentences to black and Latinos with drug cases. If you're entrepreneurial and live in one of the many states that are passing legalized laws, you may still face barriers participating in the above-ground economy. Venture capitalists migrate to these states to open multi-billion-dollar operations, but former felons can't open a dispensary. Lots of times those felonies were drug charges, caught by poor people who sold drugs for a living, but are now prohibited from participating in one of the fastest growing economies. Got it? In states like New York, where holding marijuana is no longer grounds for arrest, police issue possession citations in black and Latino neighborhoods at a far higher rate than other neighborhoods. Kids in Crown Heights are constantly stopped and ticketed for trees. Kids at dorms in Columbia, where rates of marijuana use are equal to or worse than those in the hood, are never targeted or ticketed. Rates of drug use are as high as they were when Nixon declared the so-called war in 1971. 45 years later, it's time to rethink our policies and laws. The war on drugs is an epic fail.
So I share that video for those who haven't seen it, because I think it really summarizes in a very effective way how we got to where we are. And how we got to where we are really connects to the reasons that some of our laws are also still a barrier to recovery, and why often we're not seeing some of the recovery that we would expect to see in our communities. And I want to also say that when we begin to use terms like opiate epidemic, health crisis, opioid use disorder, public health emergency, I personally pause, and I think many other people in the Black community pause. We pause because we recall when Black people addicted to heroin were the dredge of society. They were dope fiends, they were threats, they were savages, they were not people needing health services. We pause because for many of us, these issues are very personal. We've seen our family members, our friends, and other members of our community struggle with their addiction with very little support, which is why I think this week's program is so critical to us being able to spread the word to those in our community. But we also have seen that the punitive approach to addiction has not traditionally worked in our community. If you even think about the methadone clinics, where you had probably the most draconian practice, where people have to stand in line every day to receive treatment. Black suffrage in many ways has been invisible when we talk about recovery. And because that Black suffrage has been invisible, our politicians, our legislators, our courts begin to see Black addiction as an opportunity to hold Black communities accountable instead of an opportunity for treatment. I think Dr. Potter mentioned earlier that this week is really allowing us to uplift community and to change stigmas. So I just wanted to very briefly, because I think I probably used up my time, but I just wanted to very briefly share that when we're looking at how we are addressing laws that actually are preventing treatment, regardless of how much we have in the way of resources, if we're looking at, just change the slide for a second. Some barriers to prevention for success. These are 4, I think, key statutes or drugs or policies or initiatives that prevent people from recovery. We have the Drug-Free Workplace Act that really prevents people from returning to work because often there's mandatory drug testing in so many employers. DC, I'm going to often give DC credit because I think one reason I have loved this city so much is because DC understands how laws create barriers instead of helping with recovery. So Drug-Free Workplace Act, in many instances, those receiving federal funding or some kind of federal contract have to create a policy that says we support a drug-free workplace. The problem is so many employers have turned that into mandatory drug testing instead of giving out a flyer and saying we support drug-free workplace. Social Security disability insurance. In many of the videos that we watched earlier, some of the recovering members of our community mentioned that they have connected mental health disabilities that go along with their addiction. So Social Security disability is that safety net. It's a safety net for many things that may happen in our lives. And the problem with the Social Security barrier is if there's a nexus between the disability and the drug addiction or alcoholism, then that can be a barrier to actually being able to receive Social Security disability. Temporary assistance to needy families, our TANF benefits, same kind of barriers can exist. Again, DC took an initiative, unlike there are 17 other jurisdictions that require mandatory drug testing and will remove someone from receiving, deem them ineligible for TANF benefits if they're a repeated drug test positive. DC, again, has opted out of that provision, But as I hurt, if my neighbor hurts, I hurt. So I am also still concerned about those 17 other states that still have these provisions in place where someone is prevented from getting temporary assistance to needy family, one of our public benefits, one of our safety nets, if they're positive drug tests. And then access to housing. Housing is so expensive in DC, as we all know, but that's another initiative that creates a legal barrier to successful recovery. That if you have someone who has a felony, if you have someone who has chronic drug addiction, that can be a bar to public housing as well. So what are the prevention strategies? I think the first thing we have to do is remove that punitive framing that has accompanied drug addiction for so many years. And removing that framing is how we begin to see funding coming into our community. And providing full benefit access. Public benefits should be there for everyone. Public benefits are there as a safety net. When you take away the safety net, of course, recovery is going to be more difficult. And then the final thing is removing drug and felony bans in employment so that recovery, you know, I'll just be very transparent. My father lived with a heroin addiction for years. And the man, a brilliant man, no longer with us, but a brilliant man who struggled with his addiction and struggled with employment and struggled with finding employment because of the various criminal convictions he had on his record. So, you know, again, I say that these issues are personal to me. They're personal because I see how they destroy lack of recovery programs, destroys individuals, families, communities. And I will stop there because I think I may have gone over my time.
Professor Snow, what a great and fantastic presentation. Thank you for the manner in which you covered the issue around recovery, because we know that oftentimes individuals that need, or the ones that we would like to go into treatment, takes many times and many moments for that to occur. And I'm also a daughter whose father is in recovery, but it took many years for that to happen. And once he went into recovery, it took a couple of other times before he said, I'm final with it. So we do realize that those barriers are real barriers. And especially, he's also a Vietnam vet. So let's just add that to the list as well, our veterans as well.
And my dad was a Korean vet.
Right, and so they suffer very privately as well. Thank you so much. Are there any questions for anyone out there? Thank you for your manner in which you covered this topic area. So, you know, one of the things, how do you perceive that we move forward with removing these punitive measures to allow individuals to be able to get that support? We will have, on Wednesday, we will be talking about recovery and treatment and individuals that actually provide those types of resources. So how do we remove these punitive measures to allow folks to really have a fulfilled life?
So something that's been an ongoing narrative is this idea of community-based approach. You know, the videos that you started with and a lot of the comments have been talking about community-based approach. And I actually think that the legitimacy of the DC Council, the legitimacy of the DC courts is based on us as a community believing that the decisions that are rendered are fair and just decisions. So it is literally community support of, you know, telling council members that we want recovery in our community, and recovery means a holistic approach. It means removing housing bans. It means removing public benefit bans. It means giving full access when it comes to employment. And I should say, again, DC has been ahead of the curve on many of these legal issues. I think it needs to be that drug addiction and any testing of drug use should not be in any public benefits program. And again, how do we make the changes? Again, it's community-based approach, the community holding people accountable.
Wow, thank you so much. And that's one of the strong areas that the Ward 7&8 DC Prevention Center really focuses on.
Yeah. Thank you.
Community, and we try to really drill down into the community. So I appreciate that. Anyone else has any questions? Okay, well, I'm excited about our next guest, Dr. Gupta, Alka Gupta. Is she still on, Dr. Gupta?
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How is everybody?
Very well. I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to let you take it away.
Sounds great. Well, good to hear everyone today. For those of you that I haven't met, I'm Alka Gupta, and I am at Blue Rock Primary Care. My background is in internal medicine, and I did all of my training in the DMV area between Baltimore, DC, and Richmond. And then after I did my residency, I also started to explore the areas of integrative medicine and lifestyle medicine, because I noticed a lot of the questions that patients and their families ask are questions that are not necessarily talked about in traditional allopathic medicine. And so when my patients asked me about things like, how should I eat so I don't have another stroke, or how can I treat, for example, my pain in a way that's less problematic in the future, I couldn't fully answer them. And so I also started to explore those fields. And then I was up in New York City practicing medicine, and also was able to help launch an integrative medical center at New York Presbyterian and Weill Cornell in Manhattan. Last year, I returned to DC, back to my roots, to join Blue Rock Care. And what we do is we provide primary care, mostly for seniors and for patients with Medicare. And the opioid crisis is one that has been at the forefront of our work for a while. Pain, I think, so the opioid crisis stems partially from how we approach treatment of pain, sometimes within medicine in an effort to help somebody feel better. Sometimes we look at the short-term picture rather than the long-term picture. So in my few words, I'll focus on pain and how we can take a little bit more of a comprehensive approach, maybe a bit more of a holistic approach or an integrative approach to managing it, so that we set our patients, our community up for success. Pain, I think, is a huge problem because of how multifactorial it is. So when we look at the problems that are kind of hardest to tackle with a single medication, those medical problems tend to be ones that have many things contributing to them. And pain is no exception. But we take a very unidimensional approach to it sometimes. We say, okay, you're in pain, I'm going to try this medication. Then it doesn't work, I'll try this medication. If that doesn't work, I'll try increasing the dose. If that doesn't work, then I'll move to my last resort, or perhaps to surgery, or to something else more drastic. But there are a lot of things that we often don't consider when we talk about pain. And if we did, then we might take a different approach. And for example, when we think about pain, we tend to think about pain in a very traditional way. So for example, if somebody pinches my finger, that is going to activate receptors in my finger, and that is going to travel up my arm, all the way up to my neck and my spinal cord, and then it's going to go to my brain, and then it's going to go to the highest level of my brain where I feel that sensation, and it's going to trigger that sensation of pain. It's going to say I'm in pain. But you might be able to imagine two different people who respond differently to the same situation. So I know I can think of two different people where perhaps for the first person, if somebody steps on their foot, they might pull their foot back and withdraw. But I can also think of a second person who, if somebody steps on that person's foot, they might scream or jump back a lot farther, or say ouch really loudly, or respond in a different way than that first person. And that's because there's a lot more that happens with pain signals. So everybody can experience the same pain or the same pinch in different ways, some more than others, and some for longer than others. One way that you can think about this is we know that, so if you were to take a child for a vaccination, a shot, we always tell the child to look away, right? And then we give the shot over here. And that's because wherever we put our attention, that anything we put our attention on is going to increase the signals that reach the brain. So we know that if a child looks over here and we give the vaccine, they're probably going to experience the pain for less time and less intensely than if a person watches as the needle goes in, because when we put our attention on it, it actually increases the number of kind of pain signals that reach that outer layer of the brain. The same thing, interestingly, happens with things like mood and things like emotion. So believe it or not, if you're experiencing a negative emotion, such as stress or fear or anger, these are all emotions that activate a lower part of the brain. We actually call it the monkey mind, because it's a primitive area of the brain that that is more reactive rather than conscious. And so if you're experiencing a negative emotion and then you get that pain, or somebody pinches your finger, you're actually going to send more of those pain signals again up to that outer layer of the brain. On the flip side of that, if you are relaxed, or perhaps you've taken a few deep breaths before something, you have a chance of actually dampening or decreasing the signals that reach the brain. And you can actually impact the activation of those brain areas, either higher or lower, moment to moment or minute to minute. And so these are some examples of some processes that happen in the brain that we don't often think about when thinking about how to treat pain. Even stress. We each have our conscious nervous system that tells us, hey, I'm going to go and I'm going to pick up this pen, or I'm going to stand up and walk out the door. That's my conscious nervous system. That's me deliberately deciding I'm going to go do this. But we all have an automatic nervous system, what we call in medicine, it's an autonomic nervous system that operates without us thinking about it. So I don't have to think about telling my heart to beat, and I don't have to think about telling my lungs and my diaphragm to contract, to breathe. I don't have to think about controlling my blood pressure. Okay, I'm going to increase my blood pressure now when I stand up, and I'm going to decrease it when I sit down. These are all things that are controlled by our automatic nervous system. And that nervous system has two flip sides of the coin that you can probably recognize. Your automatic nervous system can be in a relaxed state where your breathing is slow and your blood pressure is lower, your heart rate is lower, or you can be in an aroused state or fight or flight. I also call it survival mode. Now we're supposed to flip into survival mode when we're in some threatening situation, like we used to get activated when, if there was a lion or a tiger or a bear running after us. Nowadays, we also flip into survival mode even in non-life threatening situations. So it can happen when you get an email that you don't like, or you're in a conversation that you don't like. And when we activate that stress response, same thing, we can increase or amplify how we perceive pain. Now, I don't mean that to sound all doom and gloom, because those are all learned responses. They're all learned pathways. There are things that we learn through our lives, through our experience, through our actions, our behaviors. And so that also means that it can be unlearned. So if you find yourself flipping into fight or flight mode when you don't want to be, or when you don't have to be, that's also something we can potentially untrain ourselves to do. So there's a positive side to that also. But when we start talking about all of these ways that pain processing works, it starts to make sense that the most effective approach to pain is going to be a multidimensional approach. It's going to be one where we try to take advantage of many different tools in order to best approach it. And that is the most evidence-based way to approach pain. So if you're wondering, or if you or somebody that you know is engaged in, trying to figure out alternatives or complementary therapies or other things that may be helpful for pain, there's some really basic things you can ask. So one is, we tend to escalate medications. So often we'll say, hey, try Advil. That doesn't work. Okay, try this. Okay, let's make it this, let's make it that. But while it sounds counterintuitive, it can be more effective to mix different medications that work in different ways. Always with some help and assistance from somebody who's taking care of you. But it can be effective to combine, for example, a medication that reduces inflammation with a medication that numbs the receptors at that place where you're having pain. Maybe it makes sense to try a medication that's specific to nerve pain, if that's what you think that is going on. And there are a lot of different classes of medications that can be combined at low doses that can often create a much bigger impact than any one at a high dose. At the same time, the side effects are also dependent on the dose often. So at a lower dose, many medications will produce no or very few side effects, but at a higher dose, once you're maxing out, if your approach is just increasing the dose, that might become more likely. There are also non-oral medications. So when you take a medication orally, that does go through your digestive system. You do absorb the medication into your bloodstream and into your system. And that can often act on many organs in your body, including your brain. And so some medications have that drowsy effect, or you might feel woozy or out of it. And when you take those medications at a high dose, the higher the dose, the greater the danger of having like a neurologic side effect or overdosing. There are patches, there are gels, there are ointments. And again, combining those with other oral medications can often get you more relief than just trying one or another. For joint pains, sounds very simple, but sometimes we abandon physical therapy a little bit too early. When you have a joint, let's take the wrist just because you can all see it on the screen. But for our elderly patients, it's more often the hips or the knees. But let's take the wrist. If this joint is aching, let's say it's due to osteoarthritis, not due to a rheumatologic or not due to an autoimmune problem. One thing that can help ease that ache is by strengthening the muscles around it. So usually physical therapy will focus on the muscles above and below that wrist. So you're not just working the wrist, you're working the muscles so that they can stabilize and take the pressure off those joints. There are also other complementary therapies that have some science behind them. So for example, acupuncture. Acupuncture has been studied in pain for quite a while, and it's thought to work through a couple of different ways. There's some evidence that it can actually impact the inflammation at the location. And then there's also a central action in the brain where it actually can stimulate your brain and your spinal cord. You release compounds that your body naturally has that binds to receptors that basically work like really mild opioids. And so it binds to what we call opioid-like receptor 1, OLP1. And so through those two mechanisms, and maybe others that we don't yet understand, a lot of people can find acupuncture helpful. It also comes with minimal side effects, so it's helpful to consider. We talked about the impact of stress and worry. Cognitive behavioral therapy, it's usually given by either a licensed clinical social worker or you work with a psychotherapist. Cognitive behavioral therapy over the course of a couple of months has shown for a long time now, decades, has been shown to decrease chronic pain for many people. Mindfulness and meditation, many people find that helpful for kind of flipping out of that fight or flight mode back into what we call relaxation mode. So back into that lower heart rate, lower breathing rate, lower blood pressure state, which is where we want to spend most of our time. There are also other options that might be appropriate depending on what kind of pain somebody is experiencing. But the goal should always be to use the minimal therapy that's effective for treating that person's pain. If you're wondering where to start, or if you know somebody who's in trouble or might need some help, I suggest working with the person prescribing a medication if you think it's inappropriate. So try to make a plan with them. That if the decision is to taper down a medication, like an opioid, and you're worried about, for example, if you start seeing that you need a higher dose than you used to get the same amount of pain control, that's something you want to raise proactively with the person who's prescribing it. Or if you notice you need the same dose more frequently, and that keeps on happening, both of those things can be a signal of tolerance. And so sometimes it can be helpful to set a goal or set a ceiling to help either stabilize the dose, decrease the dose, or perhaps switch to a medication that lasts for longer. So you're not taking a medication very frequently. When you take an opioid very frequently, that dose can stack, putting you at higher risk of overdosing. You can also ask your doc or ask a family member or ask a friend to check in on you and ask you how you're doing. Another thing that I notice is sometimes you start a medication for something, whether it's pain or anything else. You might notice that it doesn't help or do much or enough for you. And then we tend to add something else. Perhaps that medication doesn't do anything for you either, but then we add something else. But each step of the way, we have to pause and reassess, ask ourselves what's not helping, and then talk to that person, talk to that prescriber and say, hey, this is not helping me at all. Is there a reason to keep taking it? The last thing I'll say is if you do have opioids at home, even if you think that nobody else has access to them, I recommend for that and most medications, but especially opioids and other ones that you can be at risk for overdosing on accidentally, is to dispose of them at a pharmacy. So all dispensing pharmacies will have a medication disposal mechanism. So if maybe you're recovering from a surgery, you realize you don't need the medication anymore, get rid of it. Or perhaps you had an old medication you didn't finish and it was changed to a different medication. Try to get rid of the medication that you don't need at home. The bottom line is with this problem, you often have to be your own advocate or a loved one's advocate. And so if you don't have a doctor who listens and is interested in partnering with you or working with you or answering your questions, and it's important to find somebody who does. I'm going to pause there, and I'm happy to take any questions or clarify anything that I can.
I got one question. Hey, Dr. Gupta, always good to see you
Hi.
and hear you. And it's kind of gender biased. Is it a myth or fact that they say sometimes women can endure more physical pain than men because they are able to bring children? So that was one question.
I don't know the answer to that. I don't.
Okay.
It might be that the specific type of pain, or there are a lot of other things that happen during pregnancy and during childbirth also make that question a little bit hard to answer.
Okay.
But yes, I agree, it's a miracle that anybody can tolerate that amount of pain.
Okay. And then the other question I have is that at times, I guess objectively, I'm second questioning myself when you're asked by a doctor, okay, from a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the pain that you're experiencing? So to help me get a bit of gauge of that, would you say that we need to say, well, 10 should be pain that you can't sleep, you can't function, it just, shuts you down? Or how do you, gauge that and give it a number?
Yeah, it's a great question. The way we usually phrase it is 10 is the worst pain you could possibly imagine, and 1 is little or no pain at all. The answer to that question one time, I find less helpful. I find it to be a little bit more helpful if we're treating something over a period of days or weeks, and then we see like, okay, your pain has gone from a 9 to a 5. So whatever you decided to start implementing has had an impact. Or let's say, in the first visit, your pain was a 9, and then we decide to start a medication, and 2 weeks later, your pain is an 8 or a 9. That tells me like, hey, we need to reassess. There might not be a good reason to continue this medication. We need to shift gears. So it's really, I find the trend and the comparison a lot more helpful than just a one-time number. But if somebody does tell me, my pain is 10 out of 10, that means we got to do something.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. And again, always good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Okay.
Is there anyone else that would like to ask Dr. Gupta a question? Well, I do. I really do appreciate how you took us through pain, and the different variations of pain, and really the approach that we need to take, especially in having conversations with our doctors about this. What do you think in terms of this opioid crisis, do you think is the responsibility? I know they put a lot on the doctors as well to really ensure that individuals who are prescribed the opioids, that they're, and I know the district also has a way to manage that too, but what do you think is the responsibility of physicians? And I'm also thinking about young people who are being prescribed opioids as well, prevent that from being a bad thing.
I think the the clinician or doc or NP or whoever's prescribing that has a tremendous amount of responsibility. Can't control for everything, but we certainly can help at the point at which we're seeing a person. So yes, in DC and surrounding states, we can look to see what medications have been prescribed, what controlled medications have been prescribed, even if it wasn't prescribed by, let's say, me. I can see when that's been prescribed. I can see how much has been prescribed. I can see the dose. I can see how many tablets were written for. And then I can kind of, in an attempt to piece together what has already happened, even if I'm seeing that person for the first time. And all providers in DC should have access to that. So that happens in the emergency room. It happens in a clinic. It happens at a specialty clinic also. It happens with pain management docs. The caveat is sometimes if somebody's in excruciating pain in an emergency situation or an emergency room, they might place less emphasis on what's happened and what's been prescribed before and just treat that pain because they're in the emergency room. But if you ever have a question about, are providers able to see that history? We are, and we should be checking it each time. And if you're working with the pain management docs, with, if the chronic pain, we usually don't work with pain management until it's been going on for a long time and it's gotten unbearable or difficult to manage. But if you are at that point, pain management docs also have additional resources. So usually that person will sign an agreement saying that they're only going to get their pain medications from that one place, so that that person has a better history, right? They can look back and say, hey, 2 years ago we tried those other medications, they didn't work. We don't have to revisit that. And that's also very helpful. Either way though, different pain practitioners, different primary care practitioners practice in different ways. And I strongly recommend being your own advocate or bringing your own advocate, writing down your questions, kind of pushing if you feel like the wrong thing is being suggested. I don't know if that answers your question.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, it does, and I appreciate that. And I'm looking at also, earlier we showed the video of, and one of the persons that was speaking was talking about how they had anxiety and depression, and it seems like that is really a key driver of certain individuals that utilize opioids. As a physician, what do you think, or what should be done to really address that issue, because it's a behavioral health issue as well, that also in concert with becomes an addiction over time?
It is so
So how do you
overlooked.
address that?
Yeah, it is really overlooked. And there's sometimes medications that treat anxiety may also help to treat pain, because of what I was talking about before. You decrease that negative emotion, and then your perception of pain might go down. Likewise, some pain medications might decrease anxiety because they also cause your brain they basically cause brain depression of the activity in your brain, if that makes sense. And so sometimes it can be difficult to tease out which one it is you're treating and which one, why that medication is helping. If you're seeing a primary care practitioner, these should be questions that are being asked of you. If you feel like they're not, then it's also great to ask, like, could depression, could anxiety be playing a role? What happens after that is typically, you'll get asked a few questions, and if you are at risk for anxiety or depression, they might recommend either talk therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy, or potentially medication for it. And many people who have ongoing untreated or uncontrolled pain, when you treat for depression or treat for anxiety, that need for pain medication goes down quite a bit. And so it's a fantastic question, and definitely under-recognized. I think we should be screening for it for all of our patients.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Gupta. Are there any other questions? I could ask you a million one, but I do want to give time for everyone.
Thank you.
Well,
I just want to comment on one thing.
Yes.
I really appreciate how you talked about the outer, the monkey, the nerves, being nervous or being angry and stressed, those negative, how they may affect. I know that, and there's a little plug. When I did my vaccination, I looked away, for COVID, and I was like, "Are you done?" And he was done. Same thing with flu shot. So I just want to say that really does, work. But now you put a label to what I was experiencing. So thank you.
Yeah, and if you don't know what to do, or if you're somebody else, you clearly do, but maybe somebody else doesn't, start with a very basic breathing technique that you can do it anywhere. You can do it in a meeting, you can do it while driving, you can do it on the phone. Just a slow inhale and a slow exhale, making sure that the breathe out is long. That's the most important thing. So you can breathe in for 4 and breathe out for 4 counts. You can breathe in for 4 and breathe out for 5 counts, then 6, then 7, then 8. Just try to make that exhale long, and you'll automatically start noticing that your heart rate and your breathing start going down because you're flipping into relaxation mode.
Yeah, or I have something. Yeah, talk about somebody positive, something that's positive. If you talk to me about that and look away, those combinations work perfect.
Great, that's amazing.
All right.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Stephen, stay on the line.
I'm ready.
Next is the Wards7&8DC Prevention Center, because we are really excited about the work we're doing. And
Okay.
I'm going to let Stephen lead on what we do in general on the Wards7&8 prevention side, and then we'll talk about specifically the DCOR grant and the DC opioid response work that we're doing. But go ahead, Stephen. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Green Lane, and for having me talk today about the Wards7&8DC Prevention Center. We started 11 years ago, and this is a joint project venture with DBH, Department of Behavioral Health, which is a DC government agency, and the nonprofit community-based organization called BRIC Incorporated, Bridging Resources in Communities. The founder and executive director is Rosalind Parker. And like I said, I've been with her for 11 years. And what we do is we focus on, we're actually focusing now on the whole probably lifespan from 0 to, whatever, to really take a look at help establish a drug-free community in all 8 wards of DC. And getting community members involved in that. So we're doing a community-based level intervention. So it's kind of challenging at times because you're getting a whole community to take a look at what are some of the contributing factors which make it accessible and easy for youth to use illicit drugs, and take a look at also what are some of the things that are good in the community that prevent one from using illicit drugs. So if we take a look at all that, we engage the community into meaningful conversations, community conversations about what's going on in the neighborhood, what's working, what's not working. We also take a look at the laws of the land, policies, procedures. How can they be improved? How can they be maintained? Those who are working to, again, prevent the use of illicit drugs, especially for our youth. We also educate them on healthy brain development and how the interaction in using drugs actually stops your brain from developing healthily. We also take a look at sometimes use of illicit drugs may limit you reproductively, taking a look at reproductive health. And what we also do, we have what we call a YPLC component, Youth Prevention Leadership component, where we train other youth about the dangerous effects of alcohol and drugs, and then they go out into the communities, into the rec centers, after school care programs, agencies such as the Boys and Girls Club, other nonprofit agencies that service youth. We take them there to basically bring the message about what the harmful effects of drugs can do to you, your body, mentally, and physically. Because we know they probably may not listen to someone old as me or Dr. Lane, but they will listen to their peers. So we believe in that peer-to-peer education, each one teach one. As far as community leadership, what we do is we try to build the capacity of one community to make those changes, whether it be specific type of trainings, whether it be awarding them monies from maybe making from a mini grant, et cetera. What can we do to help you build your capacity to, at the end of the day, have a drug-free community? And I think that's about it. Is that anything else, Dr. Lane, you want me to cover?
I think you covered it all, and I hope Roz is on the line. I don't know if she's able to speak, but I do have Geraldine Bolden, who started this year as well. So Geraldine, is there anything that you would like to cover? Because Stephen really covered the core of what the DC Prevention Center, and by the way, there are 4 prevention centers, each cover 2 wards, and the Ward7&8 has the largest area to cover. So the challenges are even greater because it happens to be the area where there are more disparities. And so the risk factors are even greater as well. And as Professor Snow kind of alluded to, in the barriers, right? And so I think that Stephen really captured the work, and the core of that is really getting other young folks. And I think at the end of one of the videos, one of the speakers did say that, it is going to be in the hands of our youth to be able to move this forward, but we have to be there in a supportive capacity to be able to do this kind of work. So is there anything else that either Roz or Geraldine would like to share around our DC opioid response that we're doing currently?
Hey, Nora, I don't know if you saw Geraldine's text, but because of her throat condition, she really can't talk. But no, I think Stephen did an excellent job, and you're doing a wonderful job covering everything. I didn't know if you wanted to add, highlight anything that our 13 grantees are doing right now. But in terms of the DCOR pieces, but no, on the DCPC side and just the overall work, Stephen did an excellent job, and I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Oh, wow. And thank you. And yes, I do want to acknowledge and recognize that we actually do have several of our grantees on right now, including the Health Alliance Network and RSN Esports. We had awarded over 13 entities throughout Ward 7 and 8 to be able to do the work of prevention in community. And so we worked with young students and young people as well as seniors. And we had community conversations, different activities to really get the word out about this opioid crisis. And as many of us know, we know it is a problem. We're seeing it grow exponentially. We know, we see it, we walk down the street. We're ward residents. I live in Ward 7. And so does my colleague Geraldine and Stephen. So we see it every day. And so I would like to really make sure that everybody knows that these 13 entity organizations really have done a remarkable job this past year in really engaging community in a level and in a way that, you know, the small team that the Prevention Center is could not really have done. So I want to thank all of them for the work that they do. And some of the things that you'll see are videos that they were able to produce, community conversations. And part of that was actually getting people trained to use Narcan and to distribute it in communities. So several actually went into different communities, and especially over at the Marvin Gaye Park during the International Opioid Overdose Day, to be able to distribute it throughout the community. We have several of them have actually became Narcan distributors. So that's incredible. That increases interventions in community. And we also are strong partners with community partners like Family Medical Counseling and HIPS that actually go out and do the harm reduction angle. And if you guys can come back later this week, tomorrow is Talk Back Tuesday, and we're going to have a conversation with young people, as well as we will be talking about the impact of some of the drug laws that Professor Snow alluded to, as well as how does it look in workforce training programs with Chef Thomas from UPO Workforce Development. So, and then on Wednesday is the wraparound services to see how this really looks as we partner with different entities to be able to do community work, how people can access resources in community to be able to sustain or begin to maintain where they are in the recovery process. And by the way, relapse is part of recovery. And so most people relapse before they actually experience full recovery. And then on Thursday, our final day, we're doing two things. We're having an actual Narcan training, as well as another conversation utilizing our main funding source, which is the DC Department of Behavioral Health, to talk about the community resources that they do, as well as the work around getting the Naloxone in the hands of everybody as soon as possible. And then also other community partners. So I hope that you guys will be able to join us for these great presentations and different presenters on those days. We did put in a chat box an exit survey. So before you leave, if you can click on the chat box and hit that exit survey and give us some feedback about today's discussion. We are, as we said, recording this, so we will have this available at a later time on the Ward 7/8 DC Prevention Center YouTube channel, and we'll share it with our colleagues at UDC as well, to be able to get this information out far and wide, as Dr. Potter alluded to. And again, you will be able to download the speaker bios as well as the presentations later, which will be on the UDC website. I thank everybody for joining us. If there are any questions, please go ahead and ask. If not, I will definitely welcome you back tomorrow afternoon, 4 to 6 p.m., same channel, same bat time, to be able to enjoy another conversation, this one with our youth and individuals that support the work and training in community.
Okay. Nora, you want to give people time to do the exit poll. Geraldine, you can go
Yes.
ahead and stop the recording. Stop the recording, Geraldine. Thank you. And the only other thing to reemphasize